the Ottoman lands. And he assigned large tracts of territory, for instance, to France, to Britain, or to Russia. And he reserved considerable territory for Italy. And he didn't even forget Greece and so on. And for instance, as if he's some sort of an overall administrator in the world, he says, well, some territory should also be going into this country and so on and so forth. And all of these territories were parts of the Ottoman Empire. And he also communicated with the Armenian Patriarch in Istanbul. And the latter, of course, was a citizen of the Ottoman state. And he confidentially informed the Patriarch that the British and the French would together attack Turkey's Dardanelles in 1915. Now, this is supposed to be top secret information, and governments usually don't tell it to others. And even in a single government, only 2 or 3 people know such things before it happens. But somehow, they had so much confidence in Boghos Nubar that they allowed him to know. And he wrote secretly and informed the Patriarch in Istanbul. The Armenians in the United States, of course, they were the newest among the diaspora communities. But the situation changed, especially after the 1830 Ottoman-American agreement, and missionaries came over. And the idea was to convert Muslims into Protestantism. It's not, perhaps the lady there who has written a doctoral dissertation on this, maybe she doesn't agree with me, but in any case, some of the things that I've read about it, but at least they did not know much about the Turks in Islam, did they? No, they didn't. Now, we agree on that. All right. For instance, I know of a book written by an American Protestant missionary, a certain Williams, and an Armenian who was the president of the Armenian community in New York. Together they published a book called Bleeding Armenia, and it was printed in a place like Chicago in 1896, 4 years before the whole world entered the 20th century. Do you know what it says?
I can imagine.
You didn't see that? It says the Turk is a wild animal that has to be caged. We beg pardon of the hyenas and the other wild animals to have used their names in order to describe a Turk. Madam, this is racism, pure and simple. Yeah, and so I think that proves that they knew very little. Now, when I say that their relationship with the Turks and with the Armenians as well changed very radically after 1830. Now, the date of this particular book is 1896. In other words, 66 years later. So they didn't learn much in the meantime. So they turned towards towards the other Christians, whom they thought were not really the best of Christians, in a sense. I mean, they probably thought that they should be, it's better for them and for everyone else if they embraced Protestantism and so on. So the French Catholic missionaries thought the same. And they fought over the over the Armenians in a sense. And the Patriarch in Istanbul came to the Ottoman Sultan and complained about them. He says, what are these missionaries trying to do? I mean, they are members of the Gregorian Church. And of course, the Sultan sympathized with them and so on. But, and afterwards, seeing that some of the former Gregorian Armenians have embraced either Catholicism or Protestantism, then the Sultan had no choice but to accept them as such. And then he recognized, on the basis of different ferments, the existence of the Catholic Christians and the Protestant Christians in his own state, society. And of course, the Turkish families did not, they opened up schools which started as missionary schools, and the first one was opened up, I think, in 1840 or something, in Bebek. So it was a small, maybe a 2-room or 3-room missionary school, and then it developed into a Robert College. And I graduated from Robert College, by the way, and so did my wife. But things that changed since then, naturally. But in those days, in the 1800s and so on, the Muslim Turkish families didn't send their children, boys and girls, to these schools because they said it's a Christian school. It's a mission, moreover, a missionary school. And Halide Edip Hanım was the first Muslim girl graduate of the American College for Girls in Arnavutköy in Istanbul. And and from Robert College, another person who taught us English and translation and so on and so forth when I was a student there, who became our interpreter and translator during the Lausanne Conference in 1923. And his wife was a deputy during Atatürk's time, by the way, and so on. They were very well. Well, in any case, so it was that these missionary schools were very popular among the Christians, among the Armenians and the Greeks. And of course, some of them were given preferably church scholarships and fellowships to come over here. For instance, Khaçodur Oskanyan was one of them, and another one was Kardashian. Remember the 3 Kardashian sisters? That's the
Scholars?
Yeah, they got.
They come a long way.
Well, I suspect that they had something to do with the Kardashian who drew maps of greater Armenia and so on, and he got an American sign it, and then immediately that was sent to Washington for President Woodrow Wilson to see. His suggestions for in accordance with the principle of self-determination. But of course, in all these lands, the Armenians were a minority everywhere. What supposed to be an application of the principle of self-determination. Well, in any case, so the Oskanyan, for instance, he had his education in New York, and the City College of New York, and he wrote a series of articles in which he described the Armenians as the Americans or the Yankees of the Middle East, and so on. Of course, this appeals to the people, to the leaders in this country, and naturally they were good traitors. They had initiative. The Armenians are hardworking and so on. There's no doubt about that. But Turkish Armenian families came over to the New World some decades later, much more numerous, and they went to Boston, first to New York and then to New England, especially in Boston. They are very strong in Boston. anyone, John Kelly, for instance, who was a presidential candidate, the first thing that he said was, I'm going to get the Armenian genocide recognized by the Congress and so on. He had to do that because there is a very strong Armenian pressure group in Boston, and he doesn't stand a chance of getting elected if he doesn't say that. And especially if you come from California, and Pelosi came from California, the Speaker of the former Parliament, the House of Representatives, for instance, she can't change her attitude. That would be a suicide, politically speaking. So in Fresno, for instance, in 1981, the Armenians celebrated their centennial because they had first come there in 1881 and so on. Of course, the person who made the Armenians very popular and likable in this country was William Saroyan. And although I don't have a copy of that book here, this was the first book that I published when I was 19 years old in Turkey. I translated William Saroyan's short stories, My Name is Aram. You read it into Turkish and got it published. Now, when I appeared in the French court in Paris in 1984, he said, especially during the Orly trial, that was the second one in 1985, that was an easy thing because they killed a number of people, none of them Turks, and wounded about 80. And nobody came to support them because French blood and American was killed and so on and so forth. But the first one, that was a very tough thing. And we won it. Shall I say I won it? Because I was the only Turk there. Maybe that was too much. And they had attacked the Turkish consulate and restricted the freedom of movement of everybody in there. They killed a Turk and they wounded another Turk. So I was the only Turk that was called upon by the court as a témoin d'autorité, as a person who knows the issue. And there were 27 exactly Armenians opposing me there with the same rank of representation, so to speak. And some of them were very important people. And of course, and in these trials, one of the defenders, the advocates of the Armenian side, who was a former mayor of Paris, he said to me, like every Turk, you also have a prejudice against the Armenians. Oh. He told me right away, right there, when I was talking. And I said to him, did you ever translate into Armenian the work, the literary work of a Turkish writer? He said, no, why should I do it? And I said, well, I did. And when I was 19 years old, and of course I had the copy of that book, and I showed it to William Saroyan. Oh. I did that. So who has prejudice against whom? Mm. And then he sat down. And of course, really, some of my friends, of course, we learned somewhat good English at Roberts College and so on. We were very much interested in translating, first of all, John Steinbeck and Truman Capote and a number of others and so on. But William Saroyan, for me, was different. because I really liked him very much. When I read what he wrote, I said to myself, if I write something, a story, a short story or a novel or something, I like to write like him. And also he is one of my teachers. I mean, he changed my personality to a certain extent, because I was very much interested in philosophy and so on. For instance, at that time I believed, I think, in Platonism or something like that, and I wouldn't talk to someone who can't argue some philosophical concepts with me. But when I read William Saroyan, and I realized how small things in life, in everyday life, are so important. Because this man has a humanitarian approach, and the way he selects certain things that would look like unimportant to some others, and especially to me, for instance. How